Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fifth and final day of the Sustainable Event Summit. For those of you who've been on before, and I think most of you have, I hope you agree, it's been a really inspiring and thought-provoking week. There's been lots of great conversations and connections made, which is fantastic. So I'd like to thank everybody that's participated and contributed to making it the success that it's been. My name is Susan Duncombe. I am the founder of Secret Spaces. Secret Spaces is a hand-picked collection of unique event venues across areas of outstanding natural beauty. Many of the event venues that we work with have sustainability credentials, and it was that in part that inspired me to host this week's summit. But not in its entirety. I think we've all become much more aware of how important being sustainable is, and how important not just the planet is, but we are within it, and the communities in which we live, and successful businesses within those communities. And it was that really that drove me to put on the summit that we've gone through this week, and really to shine a spotlight on how events can be more sustainably run now and in the future. I've been privileged to have a number of subject matter experts working with me this week, which has been great, and they've all joined today, along with a couple of guest experts as well. So I hope what we're going to have is an interesting, interactive and lively panel discussion. And I invite all of you that are attending to join in that conversation. This really is an open conversation. If initially you can pop your questions into the chat box, that would be great. But then I'm very happy for people to unmute themselves and to join in the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my panel of experts to introduce themselves. Lucy Agace, if you would like to introduce yourself first.
Well, hi, and good morning, everyone. My name is Lucy Agace, and I'm the founder of my business, which is Go Green Sustainability. And we offer consulting services in sustainability, but also independent on-site third-party audits, certifications, which is probably the best form of green credentials that you can get. I like working with business owners and introducing them to new ways that they can buy products and services to decrease their negative impacts, but also to create positive impacts in their local area that will bring more prosperity, protect the environment and also the local people. And that would be building local businesses, working with local businesses, helping staff, and also doing things to their outside spaces that will improve their environment, wildlife, perhaps rewilding. There's all sorts of things that business owners that haven't looked at sustainability yet, they just love learning about the things that they can do, the easy steps they can take to reduce their carbon footprint and, as I say, make positive impact. So we're here to help businesses in the hospitality industries, but also I work with other businesses in other industries. I can basically help any business become more sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Ian?
Morning, everyone. I'm Ian from Go Climate Positive. We are all about helping organisations to get to grips with their carbon footprint, reduce their climate impact, and hopefully, as Lucy was saying there, maybe even have a positive impact on the climate too. I'm an ambassador for Visit Gloucestershire, and I'm also, I see Pete Ellison's here, I'm working on the Gloucester Business Show to work out what the carbon footprint of the show actually is when we're able to have a physical show. And I'm very keen to see that events organisers consider the climate impact of what they're doing, which isn't always easy, but we can help put some numbers on there and perhaps be a little bit more considered about how we do that.
Thanks, Ian. Joe from Crumplebury.
Thank you, Susan. My name's Joe Evans. I'm calling from, well, Whitbourne Estate, on which Crumplebury is based, on the Herefordshire-Worcestershire border. My day job is running the estate here. I feel a bit of an imposter amongst all you eminent events professionals. I'm a farmer, really. We run a modest farming enterprise here. We have an organic herd of beef shorthorn cattle and thin sheep, and we made the decision a few years ago that we're going to be very much focused on the estate as having environmental output as a completely logical and reasonable final outcome from farming. As well as producing food, we produce good environmental outcomes. So that manifests in cropping decisions, strong forestry management, making sure that we don't plough up to the hedgerows, we leave really good buffer strips, all that kind of stuff. The reason I'm on this call is just before lockdown, we launched our events business, which was my effort at dragging the estate into the 21st century through diversification. So couldn't have come at a worse time COVID-wise, but we launched Crumplebury at the end of last year, ready for what was supposed to be a very busy spring and summer. We're a brand new events facility, relatively large. We can accommodate 200 people in the events facility. And we're a multifaceted function suite, so we can do weddings and corporates and well, pretty much anything anyone would like us to do. And that's as a natural extension from a restaurant that I started 8 years ago. Very small restaurant, still a core part of the business, but the restaurant is all about celebrating the seasons and what the farm is producing. So we have a very limited set menu and producing menus based on what's ready on the farm, obviously showcasing our own beef, lamb and pork. And then we had some bedrooms built as part of this this development as well. So events, sort of restaurant with rooms, and the farm, trying to mix all of that lot together in an environmentally sustainable way. And I hope, as we go through the format of today, I'm very happy to share with you some of the specific initiatives that we're pursuing to maximise our sustainability credentials.
Thank you, Joe. Lucy Hall.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Hall, founder of Lucy Clare Events. We're an Oxfordshire-based events company specialising in creative, bespoke and memorable events delivered in the most environmentally friendly way we can. I started the business 4 years ago after being in the industry for around 12 years working agency side. We're constantly learning and evolving to educate and provide our clients with sustainability at the focus of their events, and actively seek out partners that are as sustainable as possible. Sustainability to me is all about being mindful of our impact on the environment and the communities we live in. As we all know, events consume huge amounts of energy and generate vast amounts of waste. By looking at ways of minimising these on our events, we can protect our environment to ensure it's around for future generations. It's all about education, I feel, at the end of the day, and hopefully by doing so, more companies will come to realise that hosting their events in this way will be both beneficial to the environment but also to themselves.
Thanks, Lucy. Lisa?
Yeah, hi there. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lisa Sweeting, and I run a company called Green Sense Events. And I've been in the events industry for around 15 years. Working across, well, a range of events really, from sort of private, corporate events, annual celebrations, weddings, dinner parties, that kind of thing. And then more recently I've been working for a charity organising their mass participation outdoor sports events. And so I think really it was kind of that position that sort of led me to wanting to be more sustainable, just having kind of witnessed the amount of waste obviously in the events industry. So that kind of led me to setting up my own business. And really, for me, I wanted to have sustainability at the heart of everything that I was doing for clients, hence setting up the business. And so we effectively offer creative and bespoke yet sustainable event solutions for businesses, whether that's from the full kind of event management service to working with venues and sustainable suppliers, or whether it's as a consultant, if a business has got an event that's working well, kind of working with them to look at how we can make some changes. So for sustainability, to me, is, as I say, kind of about protecting our future, lessening our impact on the planet, and creating a more kind of sustainable and diverse and inclusive culture going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mary?
Thanks, Susan. Morning, everyone. I'm Mary Fothergill-Kemp, founder of MFK Events, which I started up in January of this year. My reasons for starting up a company that focuses specifically on sustainability was more just to show clients how simple and easy it is to make choices that are going to reduce your impact and reduce it quite drastically. I think sustainability to me doesn't just mean using reusable cups and choosing kind of a plant-based food, but taking a step back and really kind of assessing the bigger picture and seeing how you can drive social change on a much larger scale past just the singular event.
Thank you. Martha?
I'll mute myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Martha. Martha Silcott. I invented a solution to a problem that came upon me many years ago, and it's called FabLittleBag, and that's the company I run. And effectively, FabLittleBag is a disposal bag, a sustainable disposal bag, now made from plants and recycled materials, for tampons, pads, and condoms. And actually, tampons, pads, and condoms are fundamentally a part of every event, whether you like to think about that or not. The disposal of these is actually very problematic. It's a taboo subject. Nobody talks about it. Nobody actually understands that much about it, particularly the men, due to no fault of their own, really. But there's plenty of opportunity now to really get engaged in this and make a difference. And so the mission, if you like, of FabLittleBag, here is one. You place your tampon, pad, condom in there and peel off the strip, and it's sealed inside. So it's all hygienically sealed, and you can dispose of that in any type of bin. And the point of this, the massive point of the mission, is to educate and encourage people who flush, of which there are millions, to not flush, to realise that actually the impact of flushing is hugely detrimental to the rivers, to the ocean, and to our beaches. And most flushers are what we call gobsmacked flushers. They don't realise that, I know it's weird, they don't realise, but they genuinely don't realise that actually flushing causes these problems. And now sanitary waste is the 5th largest single-use plastic polluter in the ocean. It's a really big deal. So educate those flushers, get them converted to being binners. And the second part of that is to actually take away that awkwardness and ickiness and sometimes just downright embarrassment about being a binner when the facilities to do that are not adequate. There might not be enough loo roll, the bin might be disgusting, that kind of thing. So it's to take all that away so that even if you're faced with a difficult situation, you can still be a binner and it feels good to bin and it's still hygienic to do so. So that's what FabLittleBag is all about. And the impact on sustainability for me was really about this marine pollution and the aquatic pollution caused by flushing. Sustainability to me is a huge opportunity for education. I just let's just talk about everything, because there's so much ignorance out there, and there's so much, sadly, so much greenwashing out there, which we as people who know what we're talking about, because we've spent gazillions of hours doing the research, etc., we have to get out there and break down this greenwashing, because that can cause more damage to many sustainable environments and activities. So it's really about educating. I think Lucy said that as well. Education is for me what sustainability is really all about. And, educate, improve the experience, reduce the impact, or increase the impact if it's positive.
Brilliant, thank you. And actually that's a really nice segue into Caroline, because Caroline has really truly spent gazillions of hours looking at sustainability with over 30 years in the environments of sustainability. So Caroline, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for inviting me along this morning. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm Caroline Astrup. My company is Green Spark, and I'm a specialist in sustainability PR, so that my clients can grow their business and also protect the planet, because you can be doing all the wonderful green stuff that you like, but if nobody knows about it, then firstly, you are missing a huge marketing opportunity, because there's so much research out there that shows that majority, over 3/4 of people, are actively choosing to spend their money with companies that they know are being greener and being responsible. So you can attract new customers, you build loyalty in your existing customers. You also boost your staff motivation, because after a certain point in their income, there's a huge percentage of people who actually want to work with a company that's been responsible and ethical, rather than have a higher pay increase. And also you become a magnet for job seekers, because a lot of people, particularly millennials and Gen Z, are actively researching the companies they apply to work for, and want to work with companies that they know are doing great things, that are mixing purpose with profit. So I enable my clients to tell their sustainability story with passion and no greenwashing, and get all those benefits. But for me, the real buzz for me is that you can actually use what you're doing to encourage others, to persuade others to be greener, to persuade your customers to be greener, your suppliers to be greener. But you need to tell the story, and tell the story in the right way. And yeah, that's what I do. As Susan said, I've been working in the sustainability sector for over 34 years, since the days when nobody had a clue what it was all about, and I was just thought to be playing weird, which wasn't very good for your street cred at parties, I can tell you. But I am so heartened by the progress that I've seen in those times. I mean, the women's movement hasn't made the same amount of progress that the sustainability movement has in such a short space of time. So it's very easy to get downcast and depressed and think, oh, we're all doomed. But I'm actually really positive and hopeful, because yeah, the progress we've made, and that's accelerating. The companies, you know, I've just written an article for Punchline magazine, the business magazine in Gloucestershire, about 25 companies that are being greener. And that's not companies that are offering green products and services. That's companies that are being greener internally because they believe it's the right thing to do. It was so inspiring. There are so many companies out there who are just racing to be as green as they possibly can. And often what they're missing is just the knowledge and the understanding of, and the best way of doing something that's not greenwashing, that is the genuine way of doing it. So that's my passion. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Thanks, Caroline. And so, Lisa, when on the session on Tuesday, we talked about, or you specifically talked about the brand, how a brand can benefit from the association with sustainable credentials, and I think that links nicely into what Caroline focuses on. As an event planner, what are the top 3 things that event organisers can or should be doing when they're talking to clients about planning an event?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's lots, but I think
you can have more than 3.
Thanks. I think the main thing, and you know, I expect there's people on this panel who'll probably know more about venues, but I think firstly it's to choose your venue carefully. You know, ideally an eco-friendly, you know, type venue that's doing all they can to be more environmentally friendly. Being careful about how much power they use, or ideally using solar power, you know, harvesting their rainwater, you know, utilising kind of local catering if it's in-house. So yeah, I think firstly it's about choosing the right venue, and then I think secondly considering sort of transportation to the event, and I think that might also have an impact on the venue you choose. I think earlier in the week we were talking about, oh, you know, is it better to choose a venue which is kind of out in the country versus one in the city, for example? But then obviously that throws up an issue of how people are actually going to get to your event. Obviously, if you've got good transport links, then that's better to be utilising public transport than it is having a venue which is in the middle of nowhere where everyone has to drive to. So that those kind of 2 things can go hand in hand. And I think, you know, transportation accounts for about 90% of your sort of carbon footprint of that event. So it's really important to consider. Obviously, it's tricky at the moment with COVID, and we'd love to be promoting public transport as much as possible, but I know that is difficult at this time. But yeah, I mean, ideally, kind of, if attendees are utilising public transport, and then there's a journey from, say, the train station, then looking at providing shuttle buses and that kind of thing, and promoting car sharing, both for visitors but also for staff as well, because I think quite often you think very much about your audience, but then you forget about actually the staff that are working on the event as well. So kind of promoting car sharing if you can, maybe offering some sort of incentive for delegates and staff to be doing that, such as the event organizer, the kind of business perhaps donating to a charity or offering some sort of incentive such as discount vouchers or something, so that you're encouraging people to car share or to use public transport. And then waste, and considering your waste, and obviously this is a big one because it kind of goes through everything, and I think it's thinking about it from the beginning. So rather than thinking about, right, when we get to the end of the event, what are we going to do with the waste, it's more about thinking about the suppliers that you're using in the first place. So having a really good procurement plan in place, so that you're choosing suppliers who are producing items that have already considered how the item will ideally be reused, rather than disposed of or recycled at the end. So it kind of, you almost need to work backwards and right from the beginning and think, right, who am I actually using? What are their products? What are their processes? Where are they sourcing the materials from? Before you even get to the end of the event and the waste situation at the end. So that ideally, we're looking, it's good to be thinking about a sort of a circular economy, whereby you're thinking more about the reuse of your items than recycling is the sort of gold standard, really. And then obviously working with a waste management provider, so that in terms of recycling, you've got the sort of processes in place that you can recycle as much as you can if you need to recycle, and that actually things like compostable materials, you can actually compost those materials rather than it then being chucked in the bin where it's not going to compost down. So it's things like that, just really considering all those processes and making sure that actually everyone's aware of it, because if you have these plans in place and then the staff at the event don't understand where to put things, then all your efforts are kind of for nothing, really. So I think waste is a big one. Yeah, so I think that would probably be my top three. There's definitely something around kind of food, reducing your meat on your menu, and ensuring that your kind of catering is ideally using locally sourced food. I think there's something to be said. I know that people talk a lot about kind of plant-based menus and reducing meat, which is great, but actually I think it's more about utilising locally sourced produce. So rather than kind of sourcing, avocados from the other side of the world, it's better to use maybe meat that's locally produced through sustainable farming methods. So that all sort of comes into it. So I'll stop talking and hand over to someone else.
And look, I can see, Joe, I know you're going to have comment back on that, and much of what Lisa's spoken about, Tramplebury ticks all those boxes, and Ian, I could see you nodding, and I'm sure you've got comment to make. So Joe, do you want to kind of join in, and Ian as well? So
always like to join in, Susan. What's my comment? I think I'm in a fortunate position at Whitbourne in that we can control quite a large degree of the supply chain of an event. So I completely accept that I'm in a good position, that I can channel people into making sustainable decisions without it having to feel like they're compromising on anything. In fact, I would say that it's an enhancement of the way we can approach things. Completely endorse your point, Lisa. I should caveat that I'm involved in the Country Landowners Association, so I'm separate to Crumplebury in my events part of the business. I'm very keen to be involved in the debate around future food strategies and what who am I to say what the country should be eating, but I have views on how that can all work. And I mean, one little anecdote you might find quite interesting. We, as part of the restaurant business that we have here, we cater for vegetarians, we cater for vegans. As long as we know in advance, we'll absolutely cater to anyone who comes. I have a lovely couple that come who are vegan for ethical reasons, except they come to Green Cow to enjoy a full meat menu because they are so aligned with our approach to how we go about finishing our stock, and they're organic, extensively reared, grass-fed, all the rest of it. And I think that speaks volumes as to how important the method of food production is for the consumer these days. In terms of the events part of the business, what I have found quite interesting in this very short period of time that I've been running Crumpleberry is that if you can give people the opportunity to buy into your story, I've been quite surprised how quickly they're up for outsourcing the decisions. So, especially in the corporate world, you know, I've had a couple of quite big multinational corporates that you start talking about our approach to how we run the business and the fact that we're based on the farm and we use our own food and all of our heating comes from biomass and all the good stuff that I know everyone on this call subscribe to. Once you kind of through that, then they want to just hand over running the event. And it's been quite an eye-opener to me that there's a huge responsibility as an event space owner, that you follow through then on the marketing chat into actually operationally what you do has to be on point because there's no one else that's going to check it. And I think that's going to be something that I'm having to really drill down through every layer of the team. And we talked a little bit about this at my session on Wednesday, that it's quite straightforward for me as the boss to say, these are the policies, this is how we're going to do it, this is going to be our waste disposal company that we use, and this is how we're going to procure our food. What really matters is making sure that the junior housekeeper doesn't cut a corner and say, oh, you know what, I can't be bothered to refill these refillable toiletries, I'll chuck them in the bin and put a new on it. It's that level of granularity of operational control, really, that is the process that we're going through now to really inculcate that culture within the operational side of our team. That, to my surprise, I think is the more challenging bit, actually, than setting the kind of lofty aspirational policies at the top of the organisation. Felt like I waffled a bit there, Susan, but hopefully a few points that might.
Ian, did you want to come in there?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with Joe and Lisa there about that the whole area of addressing behaviour of the people who operate in the venue, because it's all very well using a recyclable product. If it doesn't get recycled, it's no better than, frankly, than a non-recyclable one. So I really endorse that, and particularly Lisa mentioned compostable. That's a whole minefield, as I'm sure many of the panelists are aware. A lot of products that are sold as compostable might need unbelievably specific conditions for that to happen. So whether they actually will compost is another matter entirely. But I wanted to talk. I mean, I'm into carbon footprinting because I really like numbers, and I like putting numbers on things because I think that can help us make more informed decisions. And without wishing to be too controversial or disagreeing too strongly with my fellow panelists, I think you know, that what Lisa was talking about local food, completely endorse. If you can use local food, there's a lot of really good reasons, social benefits as well to the local economy to do that. But in terms of actually, you know, looking at what the data tells us, far and away the biggest element of carbon emissions in producing meat is in actually the farming and the production of the meat rather than on the transportation. So whilst I'm a great supporter of local produce, it's probably not true that you know, locally produced meat will have a higher carbon footprint than an avocado that's shipped from around the world. That's you know, a statement of fact, really. But that's not to say that I entirely you know, I'm not a vegan, so I do eat meat. I think it's important to kind of look intelligently at how we use meat, use really good you know, ethical principles to deliver it, and maybe look at how we can reduce it. but it's also, you know, it's important to try and look at the facts, some facts-based decisions too.
Thanks, Ian. And so, Lucy Hall, obviously you plan events as well. And so when you're speaking to potential clients and venues, what are the sorts of questions that you're asking and posing that kind of drive that decision-making around sustainability, but also educates, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, actually quite a few of the points that I was going to make have been mentioned, obviously around the waste management, how obviously they've removed their waste, the compostable and the recycling. I'm very much a big believer in using local caterers and suppliers, and, you know, supporting those small businesses and knowing exactly where your food is coming from, and, you know, where everything comes from. How do they reduce their energy consumption? Are they signed up to an energy renewable program? Do they use energy efficient lighting? But also, you know, using occupancy sensors in bathrooms and stuff. Those are just small little things, but they can, you know, have a big impact, and everything. Also, we've all mentioned, when I'm looking at venues, I look at how close they are to public transport, but also, I mean, I love venues that are out in the countryside. I think, you know, it's so important for clients to be able to get away, especially when they're doing a retreat. They don't want to be in the city or anything like that. But it's therefore then looking at how you can offset the carbon footprint and how venues can help with that. I think, Joe, you mentioned on Wednesday, obviously, you know, you're looking into that and planting trees on the estate, which I think is such a brilliant idea. I'd say those are probably, especially from a client's point of view, and as I've said before, it's all about educating them, but those are pretty much the first questions that clients actually come to me as well. Their focus primarily is on recycling and composting, but I think that's probably to be expected in some of these early days, but obviously, as you know, as we chat a bit more with them, or as I chat a bit more with them, we start to get down to a bit more nitty gritty and encourage and suggest other options as well.
And so, Lucy, are you finding that clients are coming to you with sustainability as part of their brief? Are you seeing that happen?
Not always, to be fair, and it is little by little, you know, giving suggestions and saying, actually, guys, how, you know, going paperless. I mean, so many clients say, oh, we're going to box X, Y, and Z to the venue beforehand, and it's just saying, well, you know, let's do it paperless, let's get online, do it all digitally. So it's just, some of them do come occasionally, but it is very much, as I said, it's all about education, and giving them suggestions and, you know, seeing what we can do and just gradually getting them into that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I know we said on Tuesday, didn't we, that we would all like to believe that we can get to the point where it's not about how do we run an event sustainably, it's we're running an event and by definition it is being run in the most sustainable way possible. That's the kind of gold standard. And, you know, Joe, you mentioned on Wednesday that you'd had an automotive company come to you to look at Crumplebury, and what the first questions that they were asking was around sustainability, and coincidentally, when I came off that session, I had an inquiry from an event organizer looking for a venue for an automotive company, and the first thing they were asking about was sustainability measures. So you know, it's kind of, it's there, and there are organisations that are looking at that. But yeah, I think we'd all like to think we get to the point where it doesn't need to be asked and talked about and educated about, because it's just how events are run. So Lucy Agace, with your certification hat on, what are the key things, and maybe much of it's been talked about, but what are the key sustainable practices that a venue or an event can adopt and adapt to that you think would make the biggest difference?
Well, yes, I mean, things that everyone has talked about already is all part of the certification process, because it takes on all the systems that the company is running. So yeah, you've all covered the points brilliantly, I must say. So I've been feverishly writing down other things to add to the picture for people to see. So one of the things, depending on the size of the business, is to write a sustainable management plan. And Joe, I don't know if you've actually got one in place. So this would include things like your purchasing policy, your environmental policy, and your employment policies, among others. But what a plan sets out is it focuses not just the management, but again, it depends on the size of your business. If you've got a big business and you're trying to run 30 different types of employees covering the inside, the garden, if you set a plan up, then it gives a set of achievements and roles that everybody knows exactly what they're doing to make the whole thing work. So everyone is on the same page and they understand. So that's perhaps one thing I can add. The other thing would be public awareness. It's a huge part of the whole sustainability process. It's actually extremely important, and I think Caroline probably agreed with me there. I hear so often, just wandering around, being in cafes or a restaurant, hearing people talk that, well, you know, nobody's doing anything. People get this impression that nothing's really happening. In our recycling, what was it, 5 years ago, people all thought, well, it's all mixed recycling. Surely they just put it it all goes in the same truck. Nobody actually recycles. Well, that's public awareness or complete lack of it. I mean, these things do happen now, and it's so important to fully engage with how you are going to let your staff, not just your staff, they go home, they have families, they have friends, and they'll tell people all the positive things. People want to know all the positive things that are going on at the moment. So talk about it. And a certification badge that you've been checked. We offer on-site audits, which is completely different from self-auditing or running your own. Well, putting your own systems in place is still great, and then you still have green credentials. But I have to say, the best type is when you've been checked by an independent auditor and they have said, yes, you're doing this. You've committed to your sustainability journey, and you'll continue to improve every year. And as we all know, things are shifting. This year we've had probably the biggest shift ever, and we have to now embrace how we deal with COVID. So that has to be added to the story, and also the standards that you have to follow and the compliances. The other thing, I didn't hear if anyone mentioned the word seasonal to the procuring fruit and vegetables locally. If you're using seasonal food, it's abundant. It could be slightly less expensive, which could perhaps save on overheads and cost of running a menu. If you can base menus on seasonal food, that would be helpful. That would also create less waste. There's a lot of food waste in the overall picture of bringing food from source to table. And this is globally, it's really quite large. And how it's transported, we don't want crates falling off the back of lorries. Perhaps this doesn't happen so much in England, but around the world it happens quite a lot. One other thing that I've picked up recently is Meat-Free Mondays, which is actually a Paul McCartney initiative. And so he's got a big website, and you can follow him on all the social media platforms. It doesn't have to be a Monday, but it has an M like meat, so I guess that's why they picked Monday. So it's also creating fun things like Meat-Free Mondays is actually quite catchy. And again, people can sit down on a Monday and they think, oh, I hadn't thought of that, and go home and think, oh, maybe we can all do meat. It's creating movement, positive change. I mean, that's not part of a sustainable certification, but I'm just trying to add to the picture, because it is a very big picture. Sustainability is huge. It covers everything. So I think that's,
Thanks, Lucy.
yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
So Jo, I know you will definitely want to add to that, and Caroline, I imagine you do too, and Ian, I'm seeing you nodding. So if we go in that order.
Thank you. Well, I'd completely like to endorse all those things you've just said, Lucy. I think one of the things that you might find interesting of how we manage it here, we have policy, absolutely, but I also, we're not a huge organisation by any stretch, but we, glutton for punishment really, I did assemble a board of directors. So although it's my wife and my company, we find ourselves paying a load of directors to tell us how to run our own business. But actually, it's a really fantastic practice. And one of our directors is, it's a bit corny, but is our environmental conscience on the board. And that is basically their job. So we've got someone else that looks at finance and someone else that looks at our F&B proposition. And it's actually my baby sister, which is irrelevant really, but she's a bit of an environmental warrior. And to have her, like Jiminy Cricket, on the board at the very top level, constantly reminding us that every decision has to be taken with an environmental conscience is actually very powerful. To a point where she will say, okay, so you're choosing a waste disposal company that sorts your recycling. She went out to the depot to inspect them to see what they were doing, and actually found some things that they could have been doing better. So it's right at the top of the organisation. It's a really important aspect. The other thing that I'd throw out there, a lot of you have used the term educating our customers, educating our staff. Absolutely agree. My experience hands-on with again some of the operational side, actually I'm finding that forcing a change of behaviour predicates the change in attitude, not the other way around. So actually forcing people to get their hands in the grim bins and pull out the bottles that they just chucked in there because they weren't thinking, forcing them to do that, a week later their attitude has followed. So I'm no psychologist, but I'm certainly finding that is a really important part of being quite draconian early on, and then actually everyone thinks it's a great idea a month or two down the line. I think me standing up and preaching possibly wouldn't have been enough. We've got to really push that agenda. And I think we'll save the Meat Free Monday debate for perhaps a different conference type at the Meat Farmer, but take your point.
But I know, Jo, that you are very focused on seasonal. So that.
Sorry, yes, absolutely. Yeah, if I may on that as well. Sorry, I'll shut up in a minute. But to endorse your point, Lucy, and how we do it here with our chef, I make them start with the farmer. Start with the farmer and start with the seasons. I don't know how many of you employ chefs, but they're an interesting breed. They always want to show off and prepare amazing menus based on whatever's inspired them on Instagram that week or whatever. We don't allow any of that. We start with what's ready on the farm, what's seasonal, what can be foraged, wild garlic, elderflower, elderberry, apples, whatever is seasonal at any particular time of year. And we start there, design a beautiful menu around it. We're not purists. If they want to buy in some fish, sea fish, that's absolutely fine, even though we're in Herefordshire. But it needs to be done in balance with what we have produced here on the farm. And anything that we buy in is just to round off that menu. Because I'm not preachy, I don't want to compromise the customer's experience by being overly preachy. But we start with what's seasonal and what's core. And one thing you missed about your analysis of seasonality is it tastes better as well.
Ah, yes.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, Jo? Do you do any foraging?
Yes.
Foraging.
Yeah, that's fantastic for margins.
Yes, I bet it is. That's another kind of word that you can build into sort of menus and things.
Yeah, we do.
It's a bit like slow food, which I'm sure is another one that you've all heard.
And roadkill. Do you do roadkill?
I don't quite put that on
one. That's good for margins.
Well, I did not roadkill, but I did share this on Wednesday, that a really sweet spot for the business model is we have a commercial game shoot on the estate here, which is kind of a polarizing thing for some. But I can tell you there is a very good, as a pretty strong argument, ethical and economic, to say if you can get a whole load of, and please don't take offence anyone on the call who is into shooting, but if you can get a whole load of wealthy Tweedy types to spend 40 quid shooting a pheasant and then charge them another 40 quid to eat that same pheasant in the restaurant, that's a pretty good business model, and one I'm very proud of. And I tell our guns that that's what we do to them as well.
Good for you. Can I just come back on a point that reminded me when you were speaking about kind of making people get their hand in the bottle and stuff. It just, now when you go to a hotel, you know about towels, you know what to do. you know whether to leave them on the floor or put them back up to save them being washed when they don't need to be washed, for example. We take that for granted. That was never, that was not always thus. And, a little piece of paper, just giving some facts and providing the keyword education to the guests, and then weirdly empowering them to do something about it, which could make them feel good. And that to me is the key for anything to do with consumer. It's one thing, so I'll just give you a quick example and then I'll shut up because it's not really relevant on that. But water companies, we work with water companies because they spend £100 million a year getting all the stuff people flush down the toilets that they shouldn't out. Obviously they fail massively because loads of it ends up in the rivers because our sewer system is designed to overflow into rivers. But, the water companies, they wanted to do something positive, but they were kind of wagging their finger and saying to people, bag and bin it, bag and bin it. And that was their mantra to do with sanitary waste. Sorry, I'm banging on about sanitary again. And it didn't really work. And they were doing that for 30 years. They had all these campaigns telling people what to do. But when you wag a finger at someone and effectively tell them off, the response, anyone who might have children will know, it doesn't work that well. So you've got to kind of, the whole point of Fab with the water companies was, it's not good to flush because of this scenario. This is what the impact is. And why don't you try this instead? So it's like, problem, you're part of it, but don't feel terrible. You've now got a solution and you can feel good. And it's that psychology with the consumer of empowering them to make positive change, which I think really is at the core of mass change. Because if we just talk about all the negatives, it's so easy to get utterly depressed about the situation, but that's not empowering. You end up then thinking, oh, what's the point? It's so bad, what's the point? And we need to galvanize the positivity to empower a little action to mean something. So I think I really support, Jo, your kind of getting people to do something small to make them realize and have that empowered impact. I believe that's really a big chunk of the answer going forward. Right.
Thanks, Martha. And Caroline, I know that you are itching to come in.
Itching to get it.
Things that have been said that are right within your sphere. So go.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, and I'll try and keep it brief because I could wax lyrical for hours about this. But it is all the psychology behind it is fundamental. And when I spent 25 years working in the charitable world, and there was this sort of like this attitude that, doing all that horrible marketing PR stuff, that's not very nice because that's what all those big companies do. But the fact is, and it's the big companies that are causing all the problems. There's a lot of the attitude, but the fact that the companies do the marketing is because it works. It works for changing attitudes. It works in persuading people to buy one thing instead of another. And a lot of that marketing is based on the psychology about the understanding of how people think and how they make decisions. And it's an area I specialise in because in the past 10 years, there's been a huge amount of research work done looking at how people respond to environmental messages and what you have to say to try and persuade people to change their mind. And also that's gone parallel to quite significant changes or research that's discovered how we make decisions, because for a long time it was thought that if you simply said to people, like take smoking for example, you shouldn't smoke because it gives you lung cancer, it gives you heart disease, it's very bad for you. And of course, as we know, the NHS and all those health bodies were just finding people weren't listening. And then the research, that's because psychologists believe that if you tell people rational reasons for something and tell them to do something else, they'll say, okay, yeah, we'll do the other thing instead. Whereas research then discovered actually our emotional side of things, which is very much linked to our primitive brain, is often the key decider. So while I would agree with what you're saying, Martha, to a degree, that you need to explain the situation and why it's bad and why people should do something else, in itself, that's not enough. And recent research has shown that actually there are about 4 groups of people who respond in particular ways to environmental messages. So, you know, my criticism about the sustainability sector for a long time is it's just banged on about, you know, you've got to do it this way because it's saving the planet. And actually this research shows that those sort of people, the advocates as they're called, are only about 15% of our population in the UK. And they will respond to the, you mustn't do this because it's bad for the planet. The rest of the people, that won't particularly have a resonance. So for example, there are the aspirationals who are 35% of our population. And for them, they want to be greener, they don't know how, but their peer group's really important to them. Their influencers, those people they follow, that they put on a pedestal, is really important to them. Shopping's their favourite hobby. You have to link the whole the environmental issue to other things other than saving the planet. And then the practicals are 37% of the population, and they just want to know about its efficiency. Does it do the job I want it to do? What's the price like? Is it value for money? And if you tell them it's green, they'll go, oh, that's nice as well. But, you know, green is not what their driving focus is. So we really have got to get away from just talking about saving the planet. If we want to save the planet, funnily enough, we have to tap into all those other things that drive people, understand people's emotion. And interestingly, what you said, Joe, about the picking the bottles out of the bin, that's a really great example of a well-known psychological effect. I can't quite remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's like, for example, if you give people a discount to buy something X instead of Y, and they buy X simply because it's cheaper than Y, and then they'll try and justify that in their own brain. So the actions first, and then the rationale comes afterwards, and that has been known to be a way that's been used to persuade people to choose the greener option, particularly more like in your practicals practicals group. So that psychology is really important, and you have to get into the skin, and you have to understand that just telling people to do something because it saves the planet is not enough. You've got to go beyond that and understand what people's real motivators and their real drivers are. And then you can probably put in the green stuff as well. But, you know, marketing, knowing your target audience is so important to get that message across to them that's really going to change their behaviour. So, yeah, it comes down to really understanding your target group and understanding what makes them tick. And that's what's really going to, you know, make a difference. And for example, YouGov's done a survey, released the results in May. You know, it was about, I think it was 68% of people don't understand the term net zero. Yet how often do we as sustainability people banter out that term? Oh, we're going to be net zero. Most people haven't a clue what you're talking about. Only 3% of people in the survey said they really understood the term net zero. So we've got to think about how people perceive sustainability and talk to them in their language.
Thanks, Caroline.
Sermon over.
No, not at all. I love everybody's passion, so thank you. I'd like to bring in Mary and Ian, actually, because I think there's a you in that what you were saying there, Caroline, picked up on the practicals and looking at the value of something, and that being a part of their decision making. And so, Mary, you know, when you're talking to corporates and looking at planning, is there a perception that being green is more expensive, or doing something sustainably is more expensive than just going along with the norm?
Yeah, I think there is a perception that it can potentially be more expensive. I think just simply because it's less known and there's less options for it. We kind of touched on it on Tuesday, that there are more and more, you know, the government Green Recovery Grant, there is £40 million the government's giving to new companies that are going to be with green initiatives. So therefore there are going to be more and more suppliers available. There are going to be more and more venues that have the green credentials. I think also, you know, as Caroline mentioned kind of a little bit earlier on, people are more likely to want to work with a company that has got these green credentials and is kind of more aligned to that sustainable thought process. And I think people are going to look at that, and yes, potentially initially it may be more expensive, but that isn't always necessarily the case. I think, you know, people, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought here. You know, people, legislation being put in place for large corporates, you know, it's now law of companies to be able to prove that, you know, they've got a sustainable supply chain, things like that. And now the government is kind of along the right track of those things. I think it is going to bring the cost down because there's going to be more options around that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's history shows that that is what happens, isn't there? More choice in any sphere brings down the price, and of course demand also. So, and Mary, I think when on Tuesday you were mentioning that you have a sustainability scoring system that you use when you're organising an event, which I think it would be interesting to hear some more about. And I'm sure, Eoin, you would have some thoughts around that, because I know numbers is your thing, and you use numbers to kind of evaluate where somebody is on their carbon footprint. So, Mary.
Yeah, so the idea behind the sustainability score is just kind of to be able to rank the options that you give to a client. So, you know, if you've got 3 venues, to give them a score between 1 and 10, and you can base that on kind of their energy consumption and their waste management and that kind of thing. Because, I mean, Eoin will know far more about it than me, but, you know, some elements of an event are far easier to track, such as transportation. You can, you know, you've got the miles, you've got their method of transport, and you've got how many people. Like, it's quite a simple, you know, maths sum to do. But when you've got something a little bit looser, for example, in terms of, you know, what caterers they're using and stuff like that, then I think the sustainability score, the idea behind that was to be able to show to clients, you know, on the whole, which venue may be better and be more attuned to kind of the sustainability sector, and therefore choose, you know, their impact visually.
Eoin, I'm sure you've got thoughts and to input on that.
Yeah, sure. I've got all sorts of thoughts come off the conversation today, but I'll try to stick. I'll try to stick to what you asked me to.
Feel free to
so yeah,
more widely.
Yeah. So in terms of numbers, you know, carbon footprinting is all about trying to ascertain where the actual climate impacts of all of the things that you're doing are. So it's about putting numbers on each of those. And it often tends to be associated with, well, we're trying to look at the carbon footprint of an organisation or maybe of an individual, but it's equally possible to look at the footprint of an event, which is what we've started trying to do with the Gloucester Business Show. And it's interesting that actually when I started to just get a list of, you know, what are the key elements that are going to affect the carbon footprint of each show, it's actually a lot of where we started right at the beginning of this conversation with Lisa. A lot of those things will actually have a direct impact on the footprint. So, you know, in terms of the venue, is the heating and lighting, you know, heating and electricity, is that coming from a renewable source or a fossil fuel source? Where's your food and drink coming from? It's going to have a substantial footprint. Are you sourcing locally? Can you minimize food waste? All these things go in. There's a lot, somebody touched on earlier, there's a lot of single-use materials often associated with events. So, you know, the source of the materials, are they recycled? Are they reused? Or are they, you know, what happens when you finish with them? Are they going to landfill? Are they going to be reused again? Can they be recycled? All of these things will have will contribute to it. How far have they been shipped? And it also mentioned earlier, you know, your guests, where are they coming from? How are they getting to the venue? Are they using cars? Are they using public transport? Can they walk or cycle? All these things, you know, have a big impact, and I just like to try and use numbers to help us make more informed decisions. But of course, there is a limitation to carbon footprint, which is that it's only looking at the climate impacts, and there are many other environmental impacts. So we need to keep developing the measures. Something I'm starting to look at now is how do we create also, as well as looking at the carbon footprint, can we look at creating a waste footprint and take into consideration the provenance of the materials? Are they being reused or recycled, or but also what happens, as you're using them, how much waste you create, and what do you do with them at end of life, so that we can actually maybe in balance look at both the waste and the carbon footprint side, because I think they're both equally important, and some of the detrimental impacts of waste don't necessarily get fully accounted for in carbon footprint.
Sure. Lisa or Martha, is there anything you'd like to add as a comment to what Eoin said?
I was just, I mean, I'm really interested in this. I remember, and I think I listened to one of your talks in a while back, and you were talking about sort of calculating sort of carbon emissions from eating an apple. It depends where that apple comes from, and then what you're doing when you're eating that apple. And suddenly you're like, wow, it's so in depth. And I think what I find interesting is whether, we talk about kind of reusable materials, and presumably when you're looking at the carbon footprint or carbon emissions, you then have to look at also the process to make that item. So I'm guessing, like, if you're looking at something like, say, a reusable cup, do you then have to balance the process to make that cup and the carbon emissions that creates versus if an item was recycled or went to landfill, the carbon emission? Like, do you have to kind of take that into account as well?
Yeah, we look at both those elements and come up with numbers for both, and then you can see what the individual contribution of each of those is.
Sometimes, I'm sure you'll agree, it's quite surprising, because studies done on the impact of a plastic bag versus a paper bag, actually the paper bag loses in every single criteria apart from littering. So people, you've got big supermarkets jumping on greenwashing bandwagons, replacing things with paper all over the place, but they haven't really done exactly what they should be hiring you to tell them to do, which is to do that cradle to grave footprint of the amount of water that's needed, the amount of energy that's needed to create paper. I mean, 146 litres of water to make one toilet roll. And people think toilet roll is like this free thing that just is everywhere. It literally does grow on trees, and we cut them down and spend loads of water and energy, and then bleach and chlorine, because we don't like normal colour, natural colour, we like it white. So, there's all this kind of, it does get more complicated when you open that bonnet and look inside, and people don't always like what they see. And, it's really difficult. I found it quite challenging in my world, where I'm kind of surrounded by the 15% that Caroline mentioned of activists, keyboard warriors, activists. And it's great that they're engaged and doing what they're doing, but they really do need to, make sure they do know what they're talking about, and not just kind of coming out with things that sound good, So I think there is a lot of need for what you're doing, and almost like this kind of cradle to grave imprint on product, so that people understand the impact of product. And I mean, we could talk all day about compostability, that and things like that, and that's another kind of massive minefield. But yeah, so I just really support, what all of you are doing, obviously, but we do need to somehow, I think, get some certification credentials behind many products, because it's the consumer purchasing of products that has such a massive impact on the big picture. And
so Martha, when you're saying certification of products, are you thinking of a certification that's similar to the kind of leaping bunny that you see on beauty products, which identifies that nothing within that product has been tested on an animal? Are you looking at the challenge is that's one thing, like there's no animal product, or it hasn't been tested on animals in this item. When you create a product, typically there is energy, water, chemicals, process, people, transport.
there's so many layers of that product entering the world and being on your table that it becomes quite difficult. So it's almost like you need someone to amalgamate all those processes and create a kind of traffic light system or something. Because, you know, us consumers, we're quite simple folk. We need it easy. If it's not easy, forget about it. You know, you can have the best thing in the world. If Joe blogs and Joanna blogs can't understand it like that, forget it in terms of the impact. It's only that 15% that Caroline mentioned that will be grabbing it. So we've got to make it easy. And I'm sure that there's loads of work to be done there.
Yeah, so interestingly, on that point about products, Martha, there's a report by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation last year that found that, you know, only 55% of our total greenhouse gas emissions come from energy. And that, of course, when we're thinking about climate change, we always think about energy. 45% of it comes from making, transporting, using, and disposing of our products.
Yeah.
So we can't ignore it. It's a really important part of the equation. And the other interesting thing about that question about sustainability labelling, actually, there's a really interesting piece of work was published earlier this year by L'Oreal, and they actually did a really expensive piece of work. It must have extensive rather, but it must have been very expensive too. Mm. They were looking at, I can't remember, it was 9 or 12 different elements of sustainability and trying to find a way to incorporate that in an overall score that they could then put on product packaging. So it's that kind of work that ultimately I think could deliver the kind of thing you're looking for.
And I totally agree, Martha. If it's not easy, this sounds like the obvious thing to say, but if it's not easy, it becomes too difficult, doesn't it? I know I've stood in Boots with an app on my phone trying to find products that were within this app that it said I could buy because they were, you know, not tested on animals. And in the end, I went out without buying anything because I couldn't find any of the brands that were on the app, and it becomes too difficult. I mean, I have now. You go away and you do some more research and you're good. But if it's not black and white or red, amber, green, then for consumers it just does become too difficult. I mean, Lucy, what's your thoughts on this? Gaze.
I think having product certification is extremely important. I mean, take organic food for one thing. I believe you can get your food as a farmer. They need to get they could get their food certified. I know that does exist. Yeah, I think it has a huge value. It's just so quick for people to see, oh, okay, I can eat that, I can drink that, I can buy that, I can use it, drive it, whatever. It's hugely important. It's so quick to create a public, well, not public awareness, but yeah, figuring out what you're buying. So it's a very easy, quick way of doing it.
It's also emotional. Again, going back to Caroline, like she's my new hero worship woman. You know, it's emotional. People buy on emotion. They don't buy on common sense or doing the right thing. A tiny bit, you know, the 15% do, but most people don't. And so, you know, and people actually, I believe, want to feel good. So they want to feel like they're doing the right thing. So if we make it easy, even if it's more expensive, which it 9.5 times out of 10 will be because of the effort gone through to not make it terrible for the environment. If you know you're doing a better thing by buying that, then you'll spend that extra 50p if you've got it, you know, to make you feel good. So, you know, I do think that a lot of these big companies need to get with the program and actually, you know, really think through how they could make a huge impact on customer behavior by embracing some of these very straightforward traffic light kind of things on the packaging, because packaging is everything.
May I make a comment?
You may. And then Caroline, I know you're wanting to go in there as well, but go, Joe.
So I can endorse all of this, that I think that in terms of product development and having it a sort of a relatively straightforward way for me as a a purchaser of product to be able to understand what the environmental impact of that product would be, I think is absolutely vital. And I'm sure there are billions of pounds being spent in R&D departments in multinationals all over the world to face this. And I think, Caroline, your point you made right at the beginning about the momentum of the sustainability movement being quite impressive, actually, even though we've got a long way to go. Absolutely accept all of that. As a lowly events operator, I just would urge those of you that are activists and lobbying for all of this. It's quite hard work and quite complicated operating an events business, and ours is relatively straightforward. And I hope that I've given the impression that I am fairly forward thinking, certainly at an estate level, about trying to do the right thing, and we're very much approaching our responsibility for ensuring that I leave Whitbourne Estate in a better state when I'm finished than when I started. And that's not just environmental, by the way, that's societal, socially. There's a bigger dimension to sustainability. But even with that kind of passion that I have, I can tell you it's jolly difficult to look at 3 products. One might be 3 times more expensive than the other and actually be less luxurious, but it's got better green credentials. I hate to burst anyone's bubble, but I ain't going to buy it. So I think it's really important that there is that sort of a layer of pragmatism around looking at the overall supply chain. And I think we are in the top quartile, don't get me wrong, but I'm not saying we're perfect. And I think it will be a journey to continue to make better procurement decisions to ensure that every year we're furthering our mission. But I think there's a completely separate issue to all of the things about product. I think the other bit is about the customer, and we have talked about it already on this call. I'm in the middle of the country. I have 0 public transport links. I think there's a bus that goes twice a week to Worcester. So I'm entirely reliant on people travelling by car or by coach or whatever it might be. I don't want to turn off the 8 corporate executives that are willing to spend a fortune and will fly in by helicopter to land for a completely exclusive, lovely retreat. I feel I have a responsibility to be able to accept those kinds of bookings, give them a wonderful time, and hope they make better sustainability decisions in their boardroom as a result of having a bit of time appreciating the lovely natural environment of Herefordshire. It's a complex beast, this. It's not straightforward, and I would certainly be very uncomfortable putting a message out there in the public domain to say, we're all about eco, and if you don't arrive in your Prius, then you're not welcome, or anything. It's not about that at all. And I think that there's, from a PR angle, it's quite a delicate, nuanced game to make sure that you can really promote your passion and commitment to it, but not be preachy and not kind of turn people off. At an estate level, what we are able to do is to offer other purchasing options to offset that corporate guilt. So if you do want to fly your helicopter in, pay a few extra quid and I'll plant some trees to offset that, to achieve. I'd be very interested to talk to you, Ian, after this, because there are various tools that we try to use, but to be able to offset your direct impacts. But not everyone has got the ability to plant a few trees to offset our customers' travel arrangements. So no rant intended, but I just think it's important that element of kind of pragmatism around the complexity of actually operating a business like this is also on everyone's mindset when we're talking about this agenda.
Sure. Caroline, do you want to come back in, and then I'm sure, Martha, you've got more, and I can see everybody nodding their heads. So, but Caroline, if you'd like to come back in.
Yeah, I mean, I just agree entirely with what Joe says, and what you were commenting as well, Susan, it is not easy being environmental. Sometimes you do think, I just want to go out and buy a pair of jeans, and it's like, what do I buy? It's just not simple. But just going back to the certification idea, I mean, I know environmentalists will go, oh, but it's so difficult, and how do we judge, and blah, blah, blah. But the great value for me in that is, apart from, some of this research shows that actually consumers in different countries have different approaches to how they buy. So, for example, in Germany, people are much more willing to do their own research to find out what the sustainable option is. In this country, we want to do something that's called choice editing. Basically, when we want to go to a supermarket, we pick something off the shelf that's green. We want the supermarket or the shop, whoever, to have done all that research for us, so that we can just go and buy that. I mean, and that just seems to be a particular characteristic of the UK consumer. But also, for me, the certification could enable a lot of confusion to be taken out for the consumer. because we have to remember that we're involved in the subject and we're thinking about this all the time. So we're going along this learning process, and we might be over here, but we forget that possibly our target audience is over here. So we take the reuse argument, for example. You know, for a long time we've gone on public about recycle, 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 and they're getting it and going, okay, we're recycling. And now we're suddenly saying, no, you don't recycle, you reuse. And the public's going, hang on a minute, we've just got in the hang of recycling, and we thought, well, that was the green thing to do. What now are you talking about reusing? So it's like when suddenly the people involved in the water industry started a campaign around, you know, got to save water because of the, what was the phrase of it? Anyway, all that carbon, you know, the embedded carbon, you know, because, you know, and you think, how the public, how on earth are they going to understand embedded carbon? You know, but if you have a certification scheme, then for me, that gives the opportunity for the environmentalists to be constantly learning, adapting, and the public don't have to know all that. They just know that if they buy something with that image on it, it's environmental as possible. And so they're not getting all these confused messages. They're not getting to the point of going, oh, do you know what? I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, so I'm not going to do anything. So yeah, that's you know, just my thought about another angle around how a particular symbol, a particular way of showing that something's really environmental would be really helpful for purchasing.
And I just say something there about waste, because we need the exact same thing on every single bit of packaging. Because, you know, I kind of know some stuff about this, but I still sit there in my kitchen just going, okay, where's the symbol? Where's the sign? It feels like plastic. Is it plastic? Oh no, it's compostable. Do I put it in my food bin? You know, there's still, I mean, for the love of God, you know, you cannot figure out where to put everything that everything's wrapped in. And you know, I'm really keen to try and do it. And so Joe Block, you know, other people couldn't care anyway. So it all just goes in there. So, you know, I cannot for the life of me understand how we haven't fast-tracked a kind of, you know, red, amber, green scenario where we've got boxes that match the colours, and you just literally put the red in the red and the, you know, green in the green. And that's how simple we've got to make it. And I don't understand why every single bit of plastic that food is wrapped, that food is contaminating it, why, you know, that should be compostable because it can go in the compost bin. There's like, to me, there's very simple ways to make that happen, but it's when you start going on about supply chain, everything gets really complicated.
I think, yeah, so I think if you bring it back to events and bringing, you know, Caroline's point up, is actually, I think the best approach for events, I guess, coordinators is to say, well, actually, we need to take that decision making, that complexity away from you, and we need to try and create the most sustainable events we can, and then let them know about it. So the onus isn't on the consumer to try and decide and to try and figure it out and make those decisions. The more we can curate the right decisions for them, then the more progress we'll make overall.
So Pete, we have one of our audience wants to join in. So Pete.
Yeah, it really, just listening to procurement supply chain stuff, everything everybody said is obviously very relevant, and it is very complex. We have, as a part of the show each time we run it, and it'll be happening in November, we have a procurement forum. We have a number of forums, but we have a procurement forum, which is populated by a dozen procurement professionals who are looking at this purely on a procurement level about how procurement can be used, and obviously what they're looking at is industry sectors and things. But it would be maybe interesting to inject this conversation into that forum in November, which Caroline, I've just sent a note to Jill to suggest maybe that's a conversation we have time to couple things up. And obviously it's something Ian would have an interest in as well. So I just wanted to lob that in, because actually getting this conversation, it's fine and good and commendable to have this conversation here amongst people who are already focused on sustainable issues and, in this context, involved in the events industry. But we've been moving into the wider discussion about sustainability and procurement, particularly in the food chain, but it doesn't just apply. Joe was alluding to it earlier, and he was making a really strong point, you know, from the point of view of sat there as a buyer, as someone trying to run a venue. Time is important. these decisions need to be clean and simple. And actually, while we can look at Joe and Joe can say, well, I can do this and that, it's actually incumbent on the procurement side of the game and the suppliers to make Joe's life simple, so that it doesn't just eat up all his time to try and get to the bottom of what on earth's got to happen next. And that's a discussion which is outside this immediate sphere of expertise, but the expertise that is here is important in that discussion. So it's how we inject it into the wider world, really.
No, and at a point, was somebody waving? I'm sure Caroline, obviously you were already working with, so I'm sure there's people within this panel that would love to be involved in that discussion. So absolutely.
Caroline leads on the whole sustainable sector for us in an advisory role. So I'm very welcome to field anyone who's interested to get involved. And I know Lisa's involved in actually rolling stuff out with us as well. But talk to Caroline in the first place, because I think all we'll be doing is saying, talk to Caroline, because actually if you can filter and think and inject, then we can hook you up with Matt Roper, who runs the procurement side, and we can make it work in a flowing manner, shall we say. Brilliant,
thank you. So are there any other questions? Because I've realised, gosh, the time has gone so quickly. It's 11:25 already. How did that happen? Are there any other questions from people who've joined as the audience, so to speak, or that anybody would like to come off mute and ask of the panel? Or comments? It doesn't have to be a question. No. Yeah, I'm going to come to the panel in a second for closing comments. I just wanted to make sure that everybody listening didn't have anything that they wanted to come in with, but I'm not getting anybody flagging or typing anything in the box. So as it is 11:25, we will start to wrap. So I think what I'd like to do is ask each member of the panel just to say a brief, because we've only got 5 minutes, closing remark before we sign off. So Lucy, would you like to start?
Well, apart from saying thank you very much for organising this, Susan, it's been amazing. And I wanted to add that the sustainability journey of a business, whether it's in hospitality or anything else, perfection is not something that really can happen, and it's not something that people should reach for. You know, talking about the intricacies of exactly the carbon footprint of a cup or any other kind of product. Well, a cup is a tiny weeny product in the cog of all the way of an event, let's say. I think it's important to focus on the overall holistic systems and the way you run your business. So forget the word perfection and just embrace the word sustainability.
Oh, thank you. Ian?
Here, Lucy. Totally agree with you. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to Susan. I've really enjoyed it today, and it just shows that I've learned a lot, and I think the more we can collaborate and learn from each other over in this space, then you know, we can help. You know, we can help just make those improvements incrementally, step by step, as Lucy says, and rather than striving for this elusive perfection which doesn't exist. So thank you.
My pleasure, Ian, and thank you so much for joining this morning. And just to pick up on the collaboration aspect, actually on a session earlier in the week, it was suggested that we set up a Facebook group, which I will be launching later today, the Sustainable Events Collaborative, I think it's called. But anyway, I will be launching it later today, and really it is intended to be a forum for people who want to support each other, collaborate on ideas, work together, whatever it might be, have questions to ask, you know, how have you done this? Does anybody know a supplier who can provide that? We've had lots of questions this week. Lucy, you had questions that you very kindly came back in from Monday around, you know, alternatives to things like cling film. So all of those types of questions that I've got the answers to from earlier in the week will go into that Facebook group when it goes live, and I'll be inviting everybody that's taken part and attended a session to join that group. Yeah, watch out for an email about that Facebook group, because I think collaboration is key on this, and us all working together. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Joe's already dropped, so I won't ask Joe for his closing comments. Lucy Hall.
Yes, thanks ever so much, Susan. It's been as Ian said, I've learned a lot. And just reiterating comments, I think, yeah, collaboration is absolutely key. And this is an ongoing journey for us all, but also particularly with me, with my clients. But no, it's been a great week, and thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you. Lisa.
Yeah, similar sort of thing for me, really. Just to say, you know, I think it's about being inquisitive and asking the right questions, and you know, exploring things together. And I think it's just really important that everyone kind of keeps talking. So yeah, just wanted to say thanks very much, and I think it's been fascinating. You know, I've certainly learned a lot this week, and you know, really grateful for you to organising it and allowing us to be part of it. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you. Mary.
Yeah, just echoing the thanks as well, Susan, for organising this whole week. It's been really good. Yeah, it's great to see so many people so passionate about kind of this, the same things that we all are. And I guess just touching upon our collective responsibility as the planners and venues and suppliers to plan these sustainable events on behalf of clients. It's exciting to see people that know what they're talking about, I guess. So it's good to know that they're the ones with the responsibility.
Thanks, Mary. And Martha.
I'm just going to be an echo, because I agree with everything that has been said. I love, to me, the non-perfection thing is so important. You know, as an inventor of a product and an entrepreneur with a business, that message I've learned the hard way. And it's totally applicable here in this particular area of sustainability. It's not about perfection. It will be extinct by the time we get there. So, you know, we just need to do whatever little bits we can and talk. Ask questions, challenge your friends. You know, ask what they're doing, or how things make them feel. I think just talking is a really great way of actually getting the wave effect, the ripple effect rather, of the micro level of the consciousness of sustainability. And hello, Scott, my friend Scott, who's here.
Oh. Thanks, Martha. And Caroline?
Yep, great points made by everybody, and you know, definitely agree with what Martha was just saying. You know, when I was younger, I wanted to change the world by lunchtime, save the world by lunchtime, and of course you can't. It's just too exhausting. And yeah, I think it is a case of just gently leading people by the hand into a different way of thinking, because otherwise what you're saying to them is like, you're a bad person, you've been playing your part in destroying the planet. And you know, none of us like to be criticised, none of us want to be made to feel guilty. So it is sort of gently, you know, leading people by the hand. And I thank you for inviting me, Susan, and for getting PR and marketing in there, because I find so often it is seen as sort of like a little nice to have, you know, or people just forget about it. I speak to so many small companies who go, yeah, we know we should be doing our PR, but we can't afford it, or we haven't got the time. And you just think, well, how are you going to get people? How are you going to get customers? How are you going to change things? You know, so and marketing as well. PR definitely should be there right at the start of something. So often I've been brought in right at the end, you know, given a fait accompli and go, hey, go and publicise that. And you think, well, actually, I can't, because you created something that actually isn't a really good story, or I could have created great stories and got loads of publicity for you right from the word go, you know. So yeah, thank you for inviting me and let me pass on this. And that's the message I think I'd leave with people is, you know, get your PR in right from the very word go, and we can help you create great things.
Thank you. Well, I would like to say thank you to all of you, because I could not clearly have done this without you. So your contributions have been amazing, and it's been really pleasing to feel and hear the passion, and to talk to people who are experts in their field and who want to drive the sustainability message and educate and involve and include and collaborate and support each other. So it's been a week. I'm glad it's Friday now, but I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it, because I've obviously learned a lot as well, and to have worked with such amazing people. And it's lovely to see that there's connections being made and conversations that are going to happen outside of this summit. So thank you all so much. Yes, I hope that we can at some point all meet in the real world rather than just virtually. That would be really lovely. But thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend. Thank you.